welcome to the program. This is Our Healthy Homes, and we are talking about the 4 pillars of a healthy home. Your real estate, your ecosystem, Sheila, your body, and your mind. All 4 pillars need to be secure, or what happens?
The roof caves in.
The roof comes tumbling down. Every week I ask the same question, and every week she gives the wrong answer, ladies and gentlemen.
It's the same answer. It's not a wrong answer. It's a different version. Down. I'm just not going to say it because you want me to say it. That's how it works.
All right. I'm excited about this week's show, and I'll tell you why. Because I'm a food guy. I am a food guy, as you know.
And I'm a food gal on the other side of the street.
Well, what side of the street is that?
You know how I am about my sugar.
Okay, so we have owned a restaurant for 14 years, and so just by osmosis, you get it. You learn a lot about cooking and a lot about food, and I have developed an interest in the how of things, and so I am so cotton picking excited. We got Bekki Flesner on the program. And we are going to talk about food science. She's a food scientist, and first of all, I just want to, if you can just define exactly what a food scientist does and what food science is really all about. So when they're listening, they have a kind of frame of reference.
Yeah, there's lots of different kinds, actually.
Okay.
So I am an R&D, or research and development food scientist.
Okay.
But when you go to college, you can go to college for food science.
All right.
I have a specialization in dairy manufacturing.
Okay.
So I had a class in cheese and a class in ice cream and how to drink milk and the different ways it can taste differently. But they also have what they call QA, which is how to keep your food safe, food safety.
Oh, of course.
And that's a whole different type of food science. And I actually worked in that area as well previously. And then they have another one, which I would just blanket statement call operations, like the managers and supervisors and hourly people who are making the cheese or making the food. And then they also have a whole other category, what I would call labeling or regulatory. How do you label the food? Make sure that people are being safe when they read the label, that, the allergens are on there, for example.
So you've just given us an outline for our conversation, which is fabulous. I'm curious about how you got interested in doing this particular thing. I love what people do for a living. And
we always say, wow, somebody has to do
someone
that.
Has to do that. Who knew? And so many times it's I never thought of that, but someone has to do that job. What got you interested in this particular line of work?
Yeah, to go way back, I grew up on a dairy farm.
Okay.
Southeast Minnesota. My dad and family are still doing the dairy farm thing. I want to shout out to all the farmers out there, because it is a hard job in Minnesota.
Yes.
They're working in the wet weather in the winter. It's snowing. They're still feeding those calves.
And I mean, coming from North Dakota, same thing, right? It's that area of the Midwest that it's hard, and bless those farmers for their passion for it.
Exactly right. So I went to college, and I'm I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, how many other college students, right? And then I accidentally kind of stumbled upon dairy manufacturing. It was just a natural fit from there. I took an intro class. I was oh, this is so much fun. I actually love microbiology. I didn't know I liked microbiology. So it was really fun from there. But I went to a school that offered that.
But you grew up with dairy all your life.
Yeah, but it's it's a way to be involved, but not doing the outside work, which is really hard manual labor in those winter conditions, for example.
Well, Sheila complains about her hard work. Just the other day, she pointed out to me, she said, look right there on my finger. Isn't that a hangnail? When she taps the keys on the keyboard, it sends a shooting pain up her.
I don't know.
I did just get back from a whole week of farming in Utah, so I did get down and dirty. Yep.
So what is the nature of your work then when you're specializing in dairy? So that is everything, obviously. You said you drink milk in different ways. I'm curious just about that statement. What does that mean?
Yeah, I probably said that a little in a different way. So to the milk statement, I worked for a milk company when I had an internship. And one thing people don't often think about is that best by date, or use by, or use this product by this date. So there's people out there testing that. Okay. So, if milk is good for 18 days, then in the food factory, people are drinking the milk at 18 or 19 days to make sure it's still good. And sometimes it's not. And then they do some tweaks to make sure it does meet that date. So I've done that. But I also had in college a very specific dairy products judging class. So I learned like the different things about texture in cottage cheese and then flavor in cottage cheese and what makes a good cottage cheese versus a bad cottage cheese.
Now, we had a conversation about
We
this
sure did.
a few weeks ago, and hands down, I said Old Home is the best cottage cheese, right? And you're like, yes,
Yeah.
because you bought some other
It
stuff.
was still a national brand.
It
was a
was.
branded cottage cheese.
It was.
There's some bad
but
cottage
it
cheese
was
out there.
not Old Home.
Right.
And
Right.
so-
So, for example, let's just take that.
Yeah.
What's the difference? I mean, because I know the difference by tasting it,
Yeah.
but I couldn't tell you what the difference is.
The why of it.
The science piece of why.
So there's another whole profession, which I really didn't even touch on, which is in food science called sensory scientists. And that is a whole nother, so you get like your food science degree and then you also get like a sensory science degree or a couple more classes. So I've had some in that, like the dairy products judging class, but that is like a whole nother level. So to the cottage cheese example, I mean, when I'm eating products, so a big part of my job is just to eat food. It's awesome. I love it most of the time.
Keith wants to be your buddy. Take your friend to work day with you.
Yeah.
I think that he wants to be
Absolutely. Although some days are better than others, like olive oil. To me, not so fun to drink olive oil straight up.
Right.
But anyway, so like we look at it and visually say, does this visually look appealing? And then we eat it and we check the texture and the mouthfeel. So cottage cheese has different like firmness or softness, and so that's an indicator to higher quality or lower quality. And then also the taste or the flavor, obviously. And you can look at the different flavor components. And then aroma too. Like sometimes you get a big woof or aroma, and sometimes, I mean, with your profession, you probably know that too. So, and then there's all kinds of other things. So like if you look at blueberry pie, it's like how big is the blueberry piece, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or what varietal is it? Do you want only blueberries from Maine, right? So there's, and then like trail mix, you want to measure the pieces. You want to make sure that you have a consistent size of peanut or a higher quality peanut versus a lower quality peanut. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It does, and it just leads me into more questions.
More questions.
So what is the difference? And as long as we're talking about cottage cheese, and what's the difference between a cottage cheese that tastes one way and one that tastes a different way in terms of how it was made?
Yeah.
Because isn't it just like cottage cheese?
No. So some products have a standard of identity, which is a legal definition that, they have to have this amount of milk fat or the cream in it, or this amount of milk and the solids of the milk, or this amount of solids. So some foods have those required by law definitions. And so they have to meet that criteria.
Okay, why do some?
I think, great question. I actually don't know the answer to that.
All right.
Yep. But the point is to be consistent and keep people safe too. But then also processing. So like how long you cook it for example, cottage cheese, and the ratio of like the dressing or the creamy sauce versus the curd.
Oh, so that is actual sauce that they put it with it, which can. Then what do you when you read the label and it says other flavorings? What's that mean?
That's like vanilla extract or maple flavor, that you can even buy in your pantry. But that's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they mix it up with other stuff, and that's how you get your.
But they don't have to list those other flavors.
No.
Of what's in it?
No.
Why is that?
I don't know. That's
Okay.
So you're getting into what I would call the nutrition labeling regulatory part of food science,
Right.
and I'm more of a research and development.
Okay.
So,
Because I'm always curious when
Yeah.
I read the label on things.
Yeah.
Because we read labels. We
Yeah.
encourage people always to read the label, and you've got a lot of things on that label that I can't pronounce, and when you look it up, probably about 4 items on that label that I can't pronounce, all kind of like they're the same thing, or
Yeah.
basically the same thing. So the question is well, why do they have all 4 names on the label? Then we'll ask that question when we come back from break. This is Our Healthy Homes. OurHealthyHomes.com is the website. I'm going to go out and pay some bills right now. We'll be back right after these messages. We're here in the studio with Bekki Flesner, and we are talking to a food scientist going to tell us all about everything we need to know about eating. When we went out to break, we were talking about the ingredients on the labels and how so many of those, they have different names.
Yeah.
And then, but when it comes right down to it, they're all essentially the same thing. Oh, it's a preservative or it's sugar of one form or another. Why the mix of different items?
Yeah, I have a couple answers to that, actually.
Okay.
One is I took organic chemistry in college.
Right.
Not my favorite subject, to be honest with you. But some of those words are organic chemistry terms. So if you look up like organic chemistry and then the word banana, you would find this huge slew of how to describe a banana with organic chemistry terms. So some of those kind of what I would say scary words are actually just using organic chemistry food science terms.
Okay.
And then sometimes it's about commodity. So oils, for example, like think of your kitchen canola oil. Sometimes the commodity is low, or it's lower quality, or there's supply and demand, so they might substitute a different oil to kind of balance the commodity market, make it cheaper.
Okay.
And then sometimes I'm trying to think of another example. I had another one, but I forgot it. Sorry.
So when
come back.
Do those different items on there when you've got a blend of? So I get that whole commodity thing. So if you've got four things that essentially do the same, they may or may not all four be in there.
Correct. Oh, but I do have one more. Sorry, can I interrupt?
Sure.
And then another example, actually I know a lot about ice cream.
All right.
When you think about
That's a whole segment, you know.
I would love to talk to you about ice cream. When you think about ice cream and like the texture and the mouthfeel of it when you're eating it, they use something called gums in there.
Right.
And they actually balance each other and help each other out, making a better product from a texture mouthfeel perspective. You put them together. So sometimes they use different ingredients, even though they might all be for texture. If you use them together, one might help at the beginning and one might help at the end in your mouth and how it feels.
I'll give you a perfect example of that. Is I made ground up some hamburger or browned some hamburger, and I made a sauce and whatnot to go with it, and I was some tomatoes and some spices and all that stuff, and it was really good, but it could have been a little like more gravy-ish, if you know what I'm saying.
I do.
And so I thought, if it only would have been a little more clingy, so it hung on the meat a little bit better instead of running off of it, it would have been so much better. But it was good, so I made it again the next day. And so then that time I just let it simmer. It just to kind of cook off some of the water and just kind of let it stir. And it was still better, but not quite, 5
Xanthan gum.
Yeah.
No, you need xanthan gum. Is that
I don't
what
know.
it is?
That might be that is one of them in ice cream that they use.
Yeah, xanthan gum.
So that whole texture conversation, I understand completely what you're saying, because there is a feel to it when you're eating it as well. We mentioned in the first segment expiration dates.
Yeah.
And how I have a thing about expiration.
Go ahead. He doesn't believe it. Tell me.
I just don't pay much attention to them,
right.
especially for a canned item or something like that. When you've got tomatoes in a jar, for example, that is high acid kind of thing, and the expiration date next weekend. It's like, something, I could probably eat those tomatoes if it was 3 years from now. Is the truth?
Yeah.
Is that true? I mean, how are those dates determined?
Yeah, it's complicated. Okay. So at the highest level, it depends on what the product is.
Sure. Okay.
So like meat, more risky.
Right.
Especially like even rotisserie chicken is more risky. Produce actually is more risky. Like to be gross for a second.
Yeah.
You think about produce is grown outside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Birds and animals in the wild will pee and poop on it.
Right.
They have germs. Now those germs are on your produce. So I secretly recommend all people to actually wash their produce before they eat it.
Sheila's nuts about it. She soaks it.
I am, and that's one of I've got that as my little story.
Okay, good.
So it depends, and so it depends on what the product actually is. It depends on what packaging structure it's in.
Okay.
Like if it's in a can, it's cooked longer and hotter, so then it's more safe. Acidity is a component. If it's more acidic, it's less likely for things to grow. Salt. How much salt is in there? If it's highly salty, less likely for things to grow. And then the cooking and the cooking method is also important. For example, if you look, there's milk that you get in a jug at the grocery store that uses what I would call HTSD or pasteurization, the old school pasteurization that Louis Pasteur invented.
Right.
But if you go to other countries, you often see milk in small packaged containers that is not refrigerated because they are sterilizing the container. They are cooking the milk longer and hotter. and it also tastes different because you're cooking it longer.
That's shelf stable.
Shelf stable. It's
Okay.
both milk. Both came from a cow. Different
Both okay to drink.
Both okay to drink. Totally safe. The difference is how they process it, cook it longer, hotter, and the package structure, and they sterilize that package before they put the milk in it.
And the key is once it's opened, now it's open to the elements, and you get.
And it could be contaminated. It could shrink its shelf life, right? So some packages, not all, will say, best if used within 5 days after opening or something like that. But not all of them do. So to answer your original question, it depends on what it is, and some things are safer than others. But canned goods are usually a safe bet. Produce, meat, I would
not so much.
Not so much. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of, and it stands to reason because especially with produce, I mean, there is no preserving.
Right.
I mean, you're on there and you have to eat it when it's fresh and wash it like Sheila says. Okay, so with that washing, let's talk about sanitation and what are some of the things that you're washing with, and where does sanitation come into play? At what part of the process is sanitation important?
I love this question. I'm so excited. I'm sorry. My first job out of college, I actually worked for a chemical manufacturer, and I would help big food factories clean their plants. I would teach them how to do it correctly. And so people can actually do this at home, and I feel like it's something that everybody should know. So real quick, I'll give you a little quick lesson if you don't mind.
Yep. Sure.
It's called the 4x4. So first, whatever you're washing, you rinse it with water, and that actually gets rid of 85 to 95% of the dirt, the food debris.
Okay.
And then you wash it with soap, so your cleaner. So that could be Dawn dish soap at home. That could be the detergent you put inside your dishwasher. In a food factory, it depends. It's a little complicated. There's multiple different ways, but they might have this machine that they actually foam the whole factory with soap. And then they scrub it if they need to, just like you would at home with your washcloth or scrub pad. And then they rinse it off with water, and that rinse is getting rid of the soap and any food that was still there. And then they sanitize it with a sanitizer. The chemistry will depend on what kind of food it is. So getting rid of, meat food would be a different chemical. And then sometimes they use an acid wash, which would be your home like vinegar, for example, because that actually gets rid of different soils.
30% vinegar. When we had the restaurant, we used Ecolab.
Yeah,
and
love Ecolab.
Ecolab came out. We had the Ecolab chemicals and the dishwasher, and then they even came out.
I'm having a heart attack over here.
Which I thought was. Well, I know, but I mean, this is commercial stuff. So when
I get it.
What they would even come out and use our fryers as testing. And one of their people would come out and they said, "Can we clean your fryers for you because we've got this new product that we're seeing how well it works." And so then they would be in there for a couple hours cleaning the fryers and going down and testing to see how effective that cleaner was and how good of a job it did and all that. I thought it was pretty good. And, a little plug to the hometown company because they did a wonderful job, a great company to work with, and they did great service work. I'm also now curious about during the we didn't answer my question though. So during the process, what is the most important? I mean, is it like before, during, or after? And then the whole packaging, like you see the packaging line, they're coming down, the containers are flying down the assembly line, bottles being filled and all that stuff. It's like, well, how clean? It's a factory.
Yeah.
Wind blowing around, all that stuff, and they got containers squirting, juice into a bottle.
Yeah.
And then screwing a lid on it.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously there's imperfect people everywhere, but I would say I've been in so many food factories because of my first job out of school, so I have seen a lot. And as a general rule, I feel so comfortable and safe about our food quality and safety in America. I feel incredibly blessed to have seen what I've seen. Most, depending on the food type, most do a big wash down, if you will, every day.
Okay.
And then there are all kinds of programs, SQF is one, that they audit the food facility to see that they're keeping on track with their quality standards. And then they do these swabs. They have all kinds of swabs now, just like you think of COVID swabs. But they have food safety swabs. So they have one for Listeria, Salmonella, but they have one before that even, ATP, the old biology term, where they can swab it to see was there any life there or not. All food is life at some point. It's an animal or a plant. So so they can do that and say, oh, it's probably clean, and then they'll do more swabs later.
Like the 3M test strips.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, because we do that. People ask us, does Thieves household cleaner really work because it's plant-based? Yes, you can Google on YouTube the 3M Thieves test strip, and it has the protein from the chicken, the raw chicken on the cutting board. Then she uses the test strip and then cleans and shows you that it actually does work.
Okay, so they're cleaning the plant before, during, and after. Before they're cleaning, they're spraying it down with a bunch of toxic chemicals.
Okay, I'm with you. I'm over here just choking up.
And so, what I'm really curious about is, does it change the flavor profile of the product that they're manufacturing?
Actually, on the flip side, you're creating a clean environment, so it can start from scratch, if you will.
Okay.
And one thing that's different, that's hard to understand if you haven't been in a food factory, is the material differences of a food factory. Like, they have stainless steel tables that are easier to clean versus like a wood cutting board. Wood is actually very hard to clean thoroughly and deeply.
Yeah, stainless steel. How about the cutting boards that are what are they made out of? Nylon or resin or plastic? The white plastic boards. You can cut the heck out of them, but you can't cut them.
Right.
And they wash up easy. And,
exactly
and
right.
you can bleach them and they get snow white again. Okay, so when we
I should have been absent today.
When we come back from break, I want to talk about. Sheila's got some stuff that she's got to share, and then I want to talk about a couple of things. First of all, what makes you different from a Chef Boyardee?
Yeah.
What makes you different than a chef? You're dealing with the same kinds of things, really, that a chef does. Are you a chef? We'll catch that up when we come back from break. This is Our Healthy Homes. Our Healthy Homes. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back to the program. Thanks for staying with us. We're going to get on with Bekki Flesner as we talk about food and food science. Fun topic, and it kind of bouncing all over the place because there's so much, and it's like it's all
one
intertwined.
question just leads into the next and the next, and then you go down the rabbit hole.
Exactly, go down a rabbit hole. Okay, so Sheila's got a couple of things she wants to share, and then we'll get right back into it.
So it kind of fits in today, but I didn't intend it to. But it's no secret, if you guys have been listening to the show, when my health took a turn for the worst and the bioaccumulation of toxins built up in my body created my liver to fail, candida, hospitalized from diet pop from the aspartame poisoning. So it gave me the desire to live and to live toxin-free. So if you have that desire to avoid those, I just wanted to share this with you because, again, it accumulates from many things that we are exposed to and things that we do. So if you're like us, we try to eat organic as much as we can, especially produce. So produce can still have the overspray and runoff from surrounding non-organic crops, heavy metals falling from the sky onto it, and so on. So according to the Food Standards Australia and New Zealand in 2018, they did a national survey. Fruits and veggies with the most pesticides residue are apples, peaches, nectarines, strawberries, grapes, celery, spinach, cucumbers, cherry tomatoes, snap peas, which are my favorite, and potatoes. So for those of us that are trying to do better with our health, it's just something that I want you to think about. So there's been a couple of good studies done on soaking our fruits and veggies in salt water, which is a method used. Another is soaking it in vinegar. But it doesn't really get rid of the waxes on the apples and whatnot. So there is still organic produce that can be coated with a synthetic wax. All right. So our Healthy Homes wants to pass along to you what we use in our home. Okay. So we choose Thieves Fruit and Veggie Soak. So it's formulated with naturally derived ingredients that can effectively wash your produce, right? We don't need to have toxic chemicals to
Do I need to scrub them like with a little toothbrush?
No.
Okay.
It doesn't affect the taste. We were talking about that earlier, so it doesn't affect the taste of your fruits and veggies. And it contains our purification essential oil, Thieves, and Digest essential oil blends is just part of what's in there. And just like on a synthetic chemical structure, there's the plant-based chemical structure that it can still work even though it's plant-based. So I would love to offer you a sample. So if you want a sample of our Thieves Fruit and Veggie Wash,
free sample.
Yep, text me fruit to 651-775-9194. If you know you want to try it, Young Living has a return policy, so you can just go to my website, ourhealthyhomes.com, go to the shop button, purchase it. If you want to chat and you want to walk through, some people just like to talk more about it.
Of it all.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, and help ordering and stuff like that, 651-775-9194.
Okay, Bekki. The company that we buy spice from, the person that we deal with is the executive chef at that company, and he is also a PhD in food science.
Wow.
Okay, so that
She probably wants to hook up with him.
that probably.
Sounds like a great person.
So it leads me to the question is, well, what's the difference?
Yeah.
Aren't they the same? What is the
No.
difference? Okay.
Yeah, it's a couple things. So part of it is the background. So where you go to school, what you go to school in. You can go and get a culinary degree, or you can get a food science or a specialized food science. Like I have dairy, like I talked about. There's also bakery. There's a beer. You can get a beer science
sure.
degree.
Sure.
So part of it is that.
Right.
And then part of it is like the core of what you do. Like I would consider like chefs to be making a recipe from scratch, like at home. But for me, I'm thinking, yeah, I want to make this great product, and I might have a benchtop or a prototype, but then I'm going to scale it up to either a pilot plant, which is like a little mini factory,
Okay.
or I might even scale it up at like a large food factory where maybe they're making, 50 items in a minute, for
Okay,
example.
right.
So how does it scale up?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So you you start with someone else's recipe essentially.
Sometimes
Sometimes.
we develop it.
Well, sometimes
and
you
the,
do
And
develop
the difference maybe with food science, for example, is I was working on this. It's not launched yet, so I can't talk too much about it. But at the highest level, I was working on this project, and they were like, oh, we've tried this once before, 10 years ago. The science wasn't there yet. Oh, we tried this 5 years ago. The science wasn't there yet. We're going to try again. And it was a very science technology challenge where we're, talking about, again, organic chemistry. And we were trying to fight it and beat it anyway with new science and technology. So that's something a little different that food scientists do that chefs don't do. And I don't know if I explained that very well.
It does explain well. What do you do when you're working on a project then? You're considering, like a chef is considering, the taste, how it presents on the plate, not too concerned about shelf life,
Right.
because it's
That's
coming
a
out
huge
from the
difference.
kitchen
Sure.
and going onto the plate. You're considering packaging
Yeah.
and stability in terms of the product, and should this be fresh? Should this be frozen? How is this going to be shipped? How is it going to be held? All of those things go into, as I understand it, into the development and the core ingredients, or some of the ingredients that go into that product.
Absolutely. And that's something a little different about food scientists as well. Like a big part of my job has been actually shelf life testing, and not just that best by date, but for example, like yogurt in general. Like it probably doesn't get to your grocery store until maybe 2 or 3 days after it's been made, because you think
Of
trucks
course.
on the road,
Sure.
that's
Right.
still pretty fast actually.
Yeah,
So
it
we-
is.
So we have to put that, let's say vanilla extract in there, and if you taste it right off, it came off the production line, it might be like, wow, really
Wow.
crazy, intense, I would call that flavor impact or flavor intensity. But after 3 days, it kind of mellows out. And then I have to check at the very end of shelf life, let's call it 21 days for yogurt, that it still has vanilla in there at all. Can you still taste that vanilla?
Okay.
So that's something we do too that's a little different than chefs.
And some of those flavors actually dissipate that quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And some things are harder than others. Yogurt is one of them because
Okay.
it has those live and active cultures. So it's actually alive, which
Okay.
is great, and it's healthy and
Yeah,
it's good.
right.
But it's hard from a science perspective with that flavor work.
Because
And
they've got a mind of their own.
Sometimes.
Because it's live.
So when I think of testing, I'm thinking petri dishes, full of cultures growing to see when the mold comes and all that. I mean, how do you? What's the testing process like then, and how is it varied depending on which kind of a product? I mean, obviously, cereal is going to be very different than
Yes.
yogurt.
Right.
Exactly right. It really depends on the product. So yogurt, you might be looking for yeast and mold. Yeast and mold is everywhere, so it's an obvious one. Also color. So if it's a natural color, it kind of fades. It gets more muted or less colorful or vibrant. So that's something we're looking for. Shelf life testing, a lot of it is sensory. You eat it, like I was talking about that sour milk. You drink the milk and it's sour. Oh, it went bad. And then when they first launch a product, and also right before they do it too, they're doing microbiology testing, to see if there's anything bad from that perspective as well.
So when you test it, it's not like someone pushes a bowl and says, "You taste it." No, you taste it. No, I don't want to taste it. You taste it. Let Mikey taste it.
Yeah,
He'll
exactly.
eat anything.
Make the interns taste it. No, just
Yeah, there you go. That's
no,
perfect.
they actually have like a trained panel of people is the right
Okay.
way to do it. Best practice is like all these people have been trained on how to properly taste for flavor, texture, visual appearance, all the things, aroma. And then, they have a procedure, SOP, standard operating
Right.
procedure of how to go about that sensory testing at the end of shelf life.
So they actually
Did any
have-
of those testers lose their smell and
Yeah.
taste during COVID and they never got it back?
It all tastes good to me.
Right?
Or
So then-
bad.
Or all taste bad. So you actually almost like have a checklist of things in that
Absolutely.
you go down and to look for this and then rate it like 1 to 10, or how do you?
Yeah. For my own R&D work, there's like an R&D phase and then there's a finished phase. And for both, I use a 5-point scale. That's my personal method, and I give it a red, yellow, green. Green is approved.
Okay.
Yellow needs rework or changes, and red is like, oh my gosh,
No
that's
way.
terrible. We'll
Yeah.
stop now. Yeah.
How about the length of time? I'm curious about how long it takes. What's the process like from the time someone comes up with a product, say, hey, we should make this, and then you guys say, okay, well, we got to take a look at that and make sure it's going to be good and so forth, until it hits the grocery store shelf.
I mean, a good rule of thumb is about a year.
Okay.
If it's like really scientifically amazing, new, great, there's nothing like it on the market, it might be 5 years. It really depends on how innovative and new it is. But sometimes they're like really quick turnarounds and even a couple months. So it kind of depends on what's out there. Also what like vendors who are making the products have capabilities and what experience they have, right? So more experience means you can turn things around faster.
How many taste testers are there for how many people taste something before it's like, okay, this is like, how many do they need?
I mean, sometimes it's me.
One
Sometimes-
person?
I mean, they had a whole group of people, and then they send me the sample, and I give feedback, and then I kind of approve it. And then sometimes we are like, this is a really big project. We aren't certain, it's newer to us. It's a kind of a higher risk project or a financially risky project. And sometimes they do what they call sensory testing at a massive scale. And you can actually sign up for these locally, these at-home or in-person tests.
Oh, Lord.
really?
And you need usually around 100 people to test them, and then they're tasting it, and they're using statistical analysis to say, this was liked by consumers or this was disliked by consumers. So that's a whole nother
You better add him
category.
to the list.
When when I was very young, growing up in Winona, Minnesota, my mother worked for Pillsbury,
Yeah.
and she actually, they would send her samples. She would go out into the community
Of course she would.
and give out, and give out samples, and then they would bake
Good old
the
Grace.
muffins or
Yeah.
use the cake
Yep.
mix or whatever it was, and she'd go back a week later then, and they would, she'd sit down with the consumer
Person, yeah.
and go through and make out the list, and then submit that data back to Pillsbury,
Absolutely.
and then they would use that in refining and correcting their things. So
They still do that.
pretty darn interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to get the prototyping. We'll get that because I'm interested also in the scaling of things. Two things. One of them is new and improved.
Oh, yeah. Aren't
So
those hot
when we
tick
come
hot
back, I want to hear
buttons?
about new and improved,
Hot
because
buttons.
how much of that work that you do is old products that have been around a while
Oh,
that you
sure.
take back in and say, okay, how can we tweak these, make them a little bit more efficient to manufacture, enhance the flavor, et cetera, and then my favorite subject, ice cream. When we come back
Boy.
from break, this is
I won't
Our
get a
Healthy
word in
Homes.
edgewise.
Our Healthy Homes. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. We're in studio with Bekki Flesner, and we're talking about food science. And I had a couple of questions when I went out to break because I know I'm running out of time here, so I got to squeeze them in. One of them is new and improved. How frequent is that to come back with a existing product and kind of reformulate it? And a lot of times being the what do I want to call myself? Is it just the package that was new and improved, or is it actually what's inside?
It's what's inside.
Okay, so tell me about that.
Yeah, it depends on the company and the brand. I'm always trying to improve things. So in the food and science industry, I think it's very common to have like a continuous improvement timeline or roadmap of projects. We're always improving. And there's always new things coming out, like new ingredients. A lot of that new and improved, the new specifically, is like now maybe like think of like cookie dough ice cream. Maybe there's a new flavor of cookie dough, not chocolate chip, but maybe I'm just totally making this up, make a strawberry flavored cookie dough. And now they're adding that into things to make
How about
it
the same cookie dough ice cream, but they've just reformulated it, and now it performs better, cooks better, bakes better, stays squishy on the inside and crisp on the outside?
Yeah. Sometimes it's because they got a customer complaint. So sometimes those customer complaints do make a difference. If you look at the bottom.
So someone is paying attention.
Someone is paying attention. Absolutely.
All right. That's wonderful. Prototyping. So I'm going back to my chef now. So the chef makes a dish, whatever it is, or a sauce or whatever. And you're like, oh, wow, this is good. We should go into production on this and bottle it and sell it. So then he says, okay, here's the recipe. Then you make it. And I can only imagine the record keeping that's involved with making these things. Say, okay, so now how are we going to scale this thing? Kind of walk through that process of scaling it from a recipe on a piece of paper that you try to production.
Yeah, sometimes, and I didn't mention this earlier, sometimes food scientists are partnering with a chef. Like they are teaming together to make an amazing, delicious product to make that work. So like I said, sometimes they're making it in a kitchen or in a lab, and that would be the benchmark or the prototype. It might be with ingredients you find at the grocery store, like actual fresh strawberries instead of like strawberries that are made into a strawberry sauce that you would see in ice cream. And then a pilot plant would be like a mini factory, and so they would take ingredients that they could actually use not from a grocery store but more scaled up ingredients themselves and kind of test the pasteurization or the cooking method, and they would kind of tweak, we want it at this temperature, did it flow through the pipes correctly or whatever, did it clean up correctly, going back to that sanitation, did it clean up well or not, and then eventually they would scale it up to an actual full-scale production run, and make sure, like I think about cakes, for example, like if you were to make a beautiful cake for a birthday party and you have those little dollops or daisies or stars on the top, it looks a little different than when you go to the grocery store and they have a piece of equipment called a filler and they're putting those little dollops on, but it's really fast. So they just want to make sure that they can kind of dial in and tweak that equipment so it can be as close to the prototype as possible. And so they just do a couple like practice runs, if you will, just to make sure. And then a part of my food scientist job is actually to get that scaled up finished product and eat it and look at it and make sure that it matched that prototype that I originally approved.
When we made our sauces, we had our recipe because we were just making them in-house, at the restaurant. Cup of this, cup of that, measure a teaspoon of this. When we go into production, then we went to the University of North Dakota. They did the work on the sauces, did the labeling, nutrition requirements, and all that stuff. And we had to convert all that into weight. Yeah. Because they didn't want cups and teaspoons. They wanted to know the weight of things, and that was for the sake of consistency. And then they made the sauces, and then they would ship them back to us. And then they'd say, okay, now taste these and compare them to the sauce that you make in the restaurant. And we went back and forth on each sauce a few times. And they finally, I would just say, make it a little hotter, make it a little bit more peppery, make it a little bit more, add a little more garlic. And it was really just that. Add a little more garlic.
Tweaks.
Yeah, little tweaks, and they would go back and pretty soon it's like with your eyes closed, you couldn't tell the difference.
Exactly.
It was pretty interesting. Okay, let's get to the best thing. Ice cream.
Yes.
So you and I are ice cream people.
Yes.
And you're the Dairy Queen. So let's talk about the difference between first of all, the mouthfeel of ice cream. What makes one ice cream, and I'm going to say a brand here, and I'm not being paid, but I love Blue Bunny ice cream, versus another brand that maybe doesn't have that same feel in the mouth. Yeah. What makes that?
It's a variety of things. Would it be okay if I kind of explain the tier qualities of ice cream? So ice cream does have a standard of identity. So if you look up on the internet, standard of identity for ice cream, a thing will pop up. It's from the government. And the goal is really, again, consistency. So for ice cream, anytime it says ice cream on a label on the front of the package, like Blue Bunny vanilla ice cream, it has to have, a certain has to have cream. Or butterfat. And a certain amount of milk or dairy solids. So the things that, like all the good nutrients that come in milk. And then a certain amount of air, for example, and that's called overrun. So that's the baseline ice cream. And if it does not meet that criteria, it's called frozen dairy dessert.
Oh.
So and there's actually a lot out there.
Yes,
and it's
there
cheaper.
are.
And then they're not really meeting a standard. It's safe. It's fine to eat.
Yeah.
But it's not as high quality. So if you see that,
know that you're not getting as high quality
you're not
product.
getting as high quality.
Is that why some of them, to me, they taste like I'm chewing on ice crystals?
Well, yes. There's a little bit more to it. Ice crystals are actually in all ice cream, but it depends on how they're processing that ice cream too, and how fast they're freezing it, and also the quality of the ingredients as well. But there's a couple other tiers of ice cream besides ice cream. There's super premium and premium ice cream. So actually Ben & Jerry's or like Haagen-Dazs, those are super premium ice cream.
What makes them super premium?
They have more butterfat, which is more expensive.
All right.
And then they have less air, or that overrun.
What's the highest quality ice cream that you can buy if you're going to buy? What's the best ice cream you can get in terms of just that quality standard? Not saying anything about flavor or brand, just the quality.
I mean, I would look up for anything that says like super premium or premium usually.
And it has to say super premium on the label?
They often do because they want credit for it.
Right, of course.
They usually say that right on there. Gelato is, not to answer your question, is like more like frozen dairy dessert. There's no standard for gelato.
Okay.
So if you see that, I would not recommend buying that usually because it's not so quality. But going back to your question, that mouthfeel is really huge. So it's really about having that milk fat or that butter fat, and then less air. And then some people use egg. And that helps with the mouthfeel.
Like a custard?
Like a custard. And that's a whole different standard of identity, which means it has more butter fat and also egg yolks.
Okay. That's really good.
That's really good.
So here's the other thing I've noticed. You can get quote unquote, an ice cream cone from one place and set it on the counter, and in an hour, it's still an ice cream cone. And then the next one, it's all melted and running down the counter. What makes that one that doesn't melt not melt?
It's a couple things. Part of it goes back to that tier of quality of ice cream, so a higher quality, like a super premium, which they do not usually use for novelties or ice cream cones, would melt more slowly. There's less air in there. Has to do with the number of solids, so again, those nutrients in the milk, like calcium. Also, the stabilizers and gum. So we were talking a little bit earlier about xanthan gum, and all those types of ingredients can make it not melt so quickly.
When you add like cookie dough or ground up cookies or something like that to ice cream, how does that impact now the making of ice cream? When they're blending things into it, because you got ice cream over here that's just like vanilla ice cream, plain ice cream, no flavor, just ice cream, and then you're adding a bunch of stuff into it. Does that change? Do you have to go back now to the science and say, we got this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things to look for. First of all, those are called inclusions, and then the swirl, or like the strawberry revel, that's called a variegate.
Okay.
And it also, part of it is what the consumer wants. Do they want a whole Oreo cookie, or but then you only get a couple because it's more expensive?
Sure.
Or do they want little tiny bits and they want lots of it? So part of it, what does the consumer want? And they actually design, or I would develop what the consumer wants. I want 2 really big Oreo cookies in my ice cream, for example.
Okay.
And then something to consider is the moisture. The moisture from the milk or the ice cream will actually migrate or go into that cookie. So something to think about is that water or moisture migration. So because nobody wants like a super soggy cookie. That's kind of gross.
Right.
And so a fun example, I was just telling my kids this the other day, is like one of those ice cream cones. If you look on the inside, if you take the ice cream out just for fun, the whole inside of the ice cream cone is coated with chocolate, and on the very bottom is a bunch of chocolate on the bottom of those ice cream cones. That's to prevent the cone from getting soggy. So the ice cream won't go into the ice cream cone and make it mushy.
Sure. So a thought went in there, not so much of this is a good flavor thing to do, and it might very well be, but it's also a presentation in handling, and because you're going down the street and you don't want the cone to collapse in your hand.
Right.
Ice cream's the best. Quickly, what was your favorite project that you've ever worked on? Do you have one?
I did a really fun yogurt project once that had a really good mouthfeel, and it had 6% butter fat or milk fat, which is for yogurt a high amount. It was super fun.
So yogurt, Greek yogurt or regular yogurt?
I like Greek.
I like Greek too. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is great. Bekki Flesner, food scientist. We've learned more in this hour than most people ever thought about. There's a lot that goes into what you put in your mouth. This is Our Healthy Homes, ourhealthyhomes.com. and we'll see you next week.
But when he calls me sugar, I love that man with all my might. Sugar in the morning, sugar in the afternoon. Sugar after dinner, sugar in every room. He says I'm sweet as I can be. When he calls me that name, it does things to me. I tell him, honey, you can call me sugar.